I've always believed in hard work. Ever since I graduated from law school and began working as a secretary at Bradley and Mason Law Firm, my ambition was crystal clear: to stand out and make a difference. At 25 years old, and after 4 years in the firm, I thought my dedication and drive would have led me far beyond the position I started in. But here I was, still in the same role, waiting for a promotion that seemed to elude me. It was common practice at the firm to promote staff after 2 years of good performance, with allowances and responsibilities increasing accordingly. But I wasn't just here for the standard promotion. I wanted to be exceptional. From the beginning, I set my sights on being the best. I worked long hours, sacrificed weekends, and became the go-to person in the office. If there was an urgent case or a high-profile client, I was always the one to handle it, often to the detriment of my personal life. In my 3rd year at the firm, everything changed. One afternoon, I was rushing to the communal printer to photocopy documents for a senior partner when I accidentally stumbled upon an official letter. It was a promotion letter, marked for another secretary, Sarah, who had joined a year after me. My stomach twisted. How could she be promoted before me? I worked harder than anyone, yet here she was leapfrogging over me. I felt a mixture of anger and confusion gnawing at me, my mind racing with questions. Why her? Why not me? The promotion wasn't announced publicly. In fact, most promotions here weren't. I had seen the letter purely by accident, but the damage was done. My disappointment soon morphed into bitterness, something I struggled to keep inside as the days passed. It weighed heavily on me, and though I kept performing my duties with precision, something had shifted. One night, after another exhausting day at work, I found myself reflecting on the emptiness of my life outside the office. I had given so much to this job, sacrificed so much of myself, yet I had little to show for it. My mind drifted to my past, to the last time I had felt truly connected with someone, my university boyfriend. It had been years since we broke up, and I hadn't dated seriously since. Curiosity and nostalgia drove me to log back into my long-abandoned Facebook account, the one I hadn't touched in years. As I scrolled through the endless messages and notifications, I saw how much everyone else had moved on. Many of my peers were married, some already with children. And then I saw him, my ex, engaged to his childhood friend. The sight of his beaming face next to hers stirred something painful inside me. Everyone seemed so settled, so happy. I logged out, overwhelmed by how stagnant my life felt in comparison. That night, I prayed. I prayed for clarity, for answers, for strength. But more than anything, I prayed for a change. The next morning, I woke with a newfound resolve. I would confront Mr. Ben, the managing partner of the firm, the man in charge of promotions. I needed answers. Why had I been overlooked despite all my hard work? With a mix of determination and dread, I walked into the office the next day. After finishing my usual tasks, I took a deep breath and marched toward Mr. Ben's office. But just as I reached his door, indecision paralyzed me. Mr. Ben was known for his temper. Once, he fired 2 employees on the spot simply because they hadn't greeted him one morning. I'd later heard he'd had a fight with his wife that day, but still, it made me wary. What if confronting him about my lack of promotion led to an argument? Or worse, what if I got fired? I stood outside his door for a full 2 minutes, my hand hovering over the door, but unable to knock. In the end, I turned back. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe it wasn't the right time. I told myself I would wait until the end of the year to approach him. Perhaps I was giving myself more time, or maybe I was just too afraid. Either way, I had given up before even starting. As the months passed, I buried myself in work to numb my frustration. But somewhere in between, I made a conscious effort to carve out time for myself. I started seeing James, a lawyer who frequently partnered with our firm. He was charming, intelligent, and everything I thought I wanted in a man. For the first time in years, I felt like I was balancing work and personal life. James was kind and patient, and slowly, I found myself falling for him. Things had been going smoothly until promotion season came around again. One Monday morning, I was summoned to Mr. Ben's office. The moment I saw the message on my screen, My heart started pounding. Could this finally be it? Was I about to be promoted after all these years of hard work? As I made my way down the hallway, I tried to calm the rush of thoughts swirling in my mind. My palms were slick with nervous sweat, and my heart thudded against my rib cage. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, sacrificing so much of my time, my energy, and even my relationships for the sake of this firm. Finally, it seemed like my dedication was about to pay off. I paused at his door for a brief moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The instant I walked in, I was struck again by how different Mr. Ben's office felt from the rest of the building. Unlike the sterile corporate feel of the law firm's other offices, his space was warm, almost homey. Plush leather chairs, soft carpets that swallowed the sound of my footsteps, and a faint scent of sandalwood lingering in the air. It felt more like a cozy living room than a workspace. Mr. Ben was seated behind his polished mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. But when he saw me, his face broke into a warm, welcoming smile. "Ah, there you are," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the plush chairs across from him. I sat down, my heart still racing, trying to control my breathing. The chair sank beneath me, too soft, as if it were swallowing me whole. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk, and began to speak. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge your dedication, your hard work," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You've been an invaluable asset to this firm. People like you are the reason we're able to achieve such great success." His words were flattering, but something about the tone unsettled me. It was too rehearsed, too polished. I knew Mr. Ben's reputation, how he could charm people with compliments, making them feel at ease just before dropping a bombshell. I had seen it happen to others, colleagues who had been fired after similar pep talks. Was that what was happening now? Was this the prelude to bad news? My hands gripped the armrest of the chair, my knuckles whitening. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to prepare myself for whatever was coming next. Just as my anxiety was about to boil over, Mr. Ben smiled again and said the words I had been waiting to hear. "Congratulations." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, and for a split second, I felt weightless. All the years of grinding, all the sleepless nights, had finally paid off. I was about to thank him when he continued, his tone shifting. "There's just one thing," he added, his voice dropping in volume, almost too casual. "For this promotion to go through, there's a risk you'll have to take." His words hung in the air, thick and heavy, and immediately, my relief was replaced with confusion. I stared at him, my brows furrowing. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Ben leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling together as he regarded me carefully. His face, which had been warm and inviting moments ago, now seemed cold and calculating, his expression completely unreadable. The silence in the room became deafening, punctuated only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, as if my body was sensing something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Then, without breaking eye contact, he said it. "I want you." My stomach flipped. My throat went dry. Did I hear him correctly? I must have misheard. "What?" I managed to ask, the word barely escaping my lips. "I want you," he repeated, his tone deliberate now, slow and clear. "I want to share something more intimate with you, for a moment." Time seemed to stop. My mind refused to process what he was saying. The meaning of his words hit me like a punch to the gut, the room tilting slightly as the weight of his proposition sank in. Mr. Ben, married, with children, was asking for something disgusting. My chest tightened, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had come in here expecting a promotion, a reward for my years of hard work and sacrifice. Now, my entire world had flipped upside down and I didn't know how to respond. Was he saying that the promotion I deserved, the one I had earned, was tied to sleeping with him? I shifted in my seat, the soft leather feeling suffocating now, as though the room was closing in on me. Every instinct screamed for me to get up and run, but I was frozen in place, trapped by the sheer audacity of his offer. He watched me carefully, as though assessing my reaction, waiting for me to catch up. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The unexplained promotions of colleagues, the sudden firings. It had always seemed strange to me, but I'd never considered this. This was the hidden cost of success in the firm. The realization made my stomach churn with disgust. But, sir, you're married, I stammered, my voice shaking. It was the only thing I could think to say, the only grasp of reason I could hold on to in this moment of confusion. He smiled again, this time a thin, calculated smile. That doesn't matter, he said, waving away my concern like it was a trivial detail. We're both adults. What happens between us stays between us. No one else needs to know. The words made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this happening? For years, I had poured my heart and soul into this job, convinced that hard work and dedication would get me to where I wanted to be. And now, standing on the edge of the success I had dreamed of, I was being asked to pay a price I never expected. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my mind clouded with a mix of anger, disgust, and shock. All the sacrifices I had made for this moment. Had it all been for nothing? If I said no, would he fire me like he had done to others? I had heard stories and seen colleagues disappear without explanation. Was this the reason? The room felt suffocating. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, the silence between us growing unbearable. What do I do? The thought circled in my mind like a mantra, but I couldn't find an answer. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to run, but my body remained still, frozen in place by the weight of the situation. I sat there, staring at him, still trying to process the magnitude of what he was asking. It wasn't just a promotion anymore. It was my dignity, my self-worth, my very career hanging in the balance. I left his office in a daze, agreeing to his arrangements, but the decision weighed heavily on me from the moment I walked out of the door. All week, the thought of it gnawed at my conscience, like an unwanted guest that wouldn't leave. By Friday night, my resolve had already started to crumble. Could I go through with this? Then, on Saturday afternoon, the call came. Mr. Ben's voice was calm, too calm. He instructed me to meet him at a high-end hotel on Sunday, mentioning the room number like it was just another task I had to complete. As he hung up, the full weight of what I'd agreed to hit me like a freight train. The reality of it. This wasn't just some abstract idea anymore. This was happening. My thoughts spiraled. Every time I tried to justify my actions, telling myself that I deserved this promotion, that I'd worked too hard for too long, it was quickly followed by guilt, shame, and dread. What am I doing? My reflection in the mirror felt foreign to me, like I didn't even recognize the person staring back. Worst of all, James. How would he react if he found out? Could I ever look him in the eyes again? The thought made my chest tighten. He had been so kind to me, so genuine. If he knew what I was about to do, would he ever forgive me? Could I forgive myself? Sunday arrived faster than I expected. I had spent the entire morning pacing, my mind replaying the countless excuses I could make to cancel. But I never made the call. Instead, I dressed in the outfit Mr. Ben had suggested, a fitted black dress that clung to my curves in all the right places. I hated it. I hated that I was dressing like this for him, following his instructions like some obedient puppet. But I convinced myself it was just a means to an end. A promotion, I kept reminding myself. Just get through it. Standing outside the hotel room door, my hand shook as I raised it to knock. My stomach twisted into knots, my skin felt cold, and my heart thudded heavily with regret. I don't want to do this. But what was my alternative? Walk away and lose everything I'd worked for? Get blacklisted from the industry? Mr. Ben had that kind of power. After a brief pause, the door opened. Mr. Ben stood there, a towel lazily tied around his waist, his round belly protruding beneath it. He looked pleased to see me, but that smile, so warm in the office, now made my skin crawl. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. His eyes lingered on my figure, and I felt his gaze like a physical weight pressing down on me. The hotel room was luxurious, every inch of it screaming wealth and indulgence. Thick carpets that muffled my footsteps, expensive paintings on the walls, a large bed draped in white linens that suddenly seemed too big, too soft. Everything felt stifling. The room was warm, but my hands were cold as ice. I walked over to the edge of the bed and sat down, perching awkwardly, my back straight as though sitting like this could somehow protect me from the storm of emotions swirling inside me. The silence was thick between us, only broken by the sound of my shallow breaths. Mr. Ben sauntered over, his bare feet padding across the carpet, and sat down beside me, far too close. His hand reached out and grazed my shoulder, then slid down my arm, his touch soft but invasive. My body tensed instinctively. This is what you agreed to, I reminded myself. Just get through it. But the moment his hand touched my skin, a wave of revulsion crashed over me. The sensation of his fingers on my arm made my stomach churn. I fought to keep my breathing steady, but each shallow breath was laced with panic. His hand moved to my back, tracing lazy circles, and suddenly, everything became clear. I couldn't do this. Not for a promotion. Not for anything. The shame, the guilt, the disgust, it all hit me at once, like a dam had burst inside me. What am I doing here? What had I let myself become? My thoughts raced, my chest tightened, and the room began to spin. This wasn't who I was. This wasn't the person I wanted to be. I could feel my heart pounding faster and faster as the decision crystallized in my mind. I abruptly stood up, shaking off his hand. I can't do this, I blurted, my voice shaky but resolute. My legs felt weak beneath me, but I didn't wait for his response. I was already moving, heading toward the door. Wait, Mr. Ben called after me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I had to get out of there before I lost the little control I had left. I yanked the door open and fled down the hallway, my heels clicking loudly on the polished floors, the hotel's luxurious decor blurring around me. Tears stung my eyes as I ran, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. What had I been thinking? What had I almost become? I made it out of the hotel and into the cool evening air, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. My body shook, whether from the cold or the adrenaline, I couldn't tell. A lump rose in my throat, and the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. They streamed down my cheeks, hot and bitter, as I walked aimlessly through the streets, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I felt disgusted with myself, empowered and ashamed all at once. I had stood up for myself, walked away from something that could have destroyed me, but the fact that I had even agreed to it in the first place gnawed at me. How had I let it come to this? The city lights blurred as I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. James! The thought of him brought a fresh wave of shame. How could I face him after this? Even though nothing had happened, I had come so close. Too close. When I finally made it back home, I collapsed onto my bed, emotionally drained. The weight of everything settled over me like a heavy blanket, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. Mr. Ben's smile, the hotel room, the moment I almost gave in. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, my mind a chaotic mess of guilt, relief, and self-loathing. Part of me wanted to quit my job immediately, walk away from the firm, and never look back. But the other part, the part that had fought so hard to get to where I was terrified. What would I do? Where would I go? Would leaving even change anything? Or would the shadow of this moment follow me wherever I went? I debated my next move long into the night, torn between the urge to run and the fear of starting over. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, but even in sleep, the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.